Welcome, everybody, to episode 32 of Black and Gold Weekly, a weekly Boston Bruins show here on YouTube in partnership with Black and Gold Productions. And we've got plenty to talk about here. No episode last week. Took a week off. I was on vacation, but we are back and ready to go this week to talk more Boston Bruins offseason. And as you can see, I've got a guest on. Danny has returned. He's been on this show many, many times over the last few months. But Danny's back again to talk about the Bruins offseason. We're going to discuss pretty much their offseason as a whole, get his opinion on everything, talk about the draft, free agency, re-signings, all of that, everything that's happened so far. So, Danny, welcome back to the show. This has got to be like your fifth or sixth time on now. But appreciate you coming on, and it's great to have you again to talk some Bruins hockey.
Thank you for having me on. I'm always down to talk hockey, and it seems like, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, I'll be back. Well, here I am again. Like, it's good to be back, and it's good to sort of have hockey coming up relatively soon, believe it or not.
Yeah, it's crazy how fast the summer's gone by, and we're already, next month we'll get into training camp and preseason, and then in October the regular season returns. So
unbelievable.
It is unbelievable how quick the turnaround has been, and I think the Stanley Cup going into July definitely helped shorten that turnaround quite a bit. But we're going to have hockey sooner rather than later, which is really unbelievable, but awesome at the same time, is I can't wait to get back into the swing of things and get back to having hockey on my TV screen on a nightly basis.
Absolutely.
So before we get started here, I just want to give a big thank you to Mark Allred and the entire team at Black and Gold Productions. This show would not be happening without them. Obviously, it's in partnership with B&G Productions, and I can't thank them enough for all of their support. So thank you to Mark and everyone for allowing this to happen. And also, as always, I want to point out the links down in the description of the video. We've got Boston Bruins apparel, we've got NHL apparel, and we've got NCAA college apparel. If you are in the market for any of those things, want to rep any of those teams, please feel free to check out the links down in the description. It really helps out a lot. They've got a wide variety of products, your usual shirts, hats, sweatshirts, pants, all of that kind of stuff, jerseys obviously, but then they've got a huge array of other accessory products as well, all kinds of different things for you to check out. So if you're looking for anything Boston Bruins, anything for any NHL team, or anything for a college team to rep, please check out those 3 links down in the description. It really would mean a lot. But Danny, let's get into it here. We're going to start off by talking about the draft, then we're going to go into Boston's re-signings, and then we're going to go into Boston's free agent additions, which there were a lot of, which I've talked about quite a bit on this show and on my other Off the Wall Hockey channel as well. But we'll get into it with the draft. I just kind of overall want to get your opinion on the Bruins draft, and then I'll chime in a little bit on what I think. But all in all, how do you think Boston did here in the 2021 NHL draft?
I think they did very well for a couple of reasons. For one thing, and we've talked about this on the show before, I thought that the Bruins didn't necessarily, they went with the safe players from America and the players from their own backyard, like Boston University and things like that. And no doubt, there are great players here in America, but I've always thought, well, at least for the past couple of years, that they needed to expand their, scouting reach. And they did that in this draft. Their first pick, Fabian Lysell from Sweden, 2003 born player, which makes me feel really old, but anyway, I was very pleased with that pick. He's a right wing player. He is on the smaller side at 5'10", but when you look at this Bruins core, there is a ton of veterans, right? Mm-hmm. And they have a ton of veterans, and so like we also talked about on the show before, they need to reload in some fashion because this core group is getting older. And I'm not saying that Fabian Lysell is going to be the next David Pastrnak or whatever, but you need to have solid depth. And then they took Philip Svedback. I believe I'm saying that right.
Yeah, Svedback, the
Who's also from
goaltender.
Sweden. I'm going by country and not necessarily pick order.
Yeah.
And Oscar Jelvik, who is also from Sweden. And to me, this seems like PJ Axelson, who is the director of international scouting, I believe, or the European scouting coordinator.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder how much of a hand he had in this because, PJ Axelson was a great Swedish player for the Bruins, and I'm wondering, how much of a hand he played in this. I think I was very happy with Fabian Lysell. He was kind of an under the radar pick in comparison to, you know, some of the other higher picked players because, in my opinion, like you said on your video, there's a lot of potential with the top picks
Mm-hmm.
and there's a lot of untapped potential because they're all so young. But so that allowed for Lysell to slide to the Bruins, and I really really like the pick, and I really really like what they did in this draft. I don't really think they reached for any players necessarily. They were always they always seem to be good for a reach or two in the past couple drafts, and
Yeah.
honestly, I think they played it safe and played it smart, and that's exactly what they needed to do because they're in an interesting position where they have a good core, but they also need to reload, like I said, and they
Mm-hmm.
need to develop. So that doesn't leave them a ton of wiggle room for error due to past drafts, unfortunately.
Yeah, I was really happy with this draft. And I think one of the biggest things was that, like you said, the Bruins had been reaching in drafts for years, and they always seem to take project players. They always seem to reach for guys. And a lot of times, when they make a pick, that all the people covering the draft, all the analysts are like, well, that was a little bit off the board. That wasn't exactly expected. It seemed like in this draft, they finally started just taking the best player available. They didn't really worry about position. They didn't really worry about, a, how a timeline for when they're going to fit in and whatnot. They just took the best players that they could get and the guys that they liked the most, and that makes this draft, I think, one of the better ones for the Bruins that I've seen. I mean, we obviously don't know how it's going to work out long term, but this is the first time in a while I've left a Bruins draft and been happy with
Me
what
too.
they've done and been
Me
like,
too.
wow, they made some really good picks here. Um, I still weeks later cannot believe that Fabian Lysell dropped all the way to Boston. That 21st overall, I had Lysell ranked 11th in my draft rankings. So
Mm,
I thought could be a top 10 pick, and he drops all the way to 21 to the Bruins.
yeah.
That to me is an absolute huge win. This guy has a ton of upside potential. He's got a great all-around game. He's very creative. He's great with the puck on his stick. He creates his own scoring chances, which I think is something the Bruins are kind of lacking.
Yep.
They don't have a lot of creativity up front. They don't have a lot of guys who, they play a very system game where, they don't have a lot of guys who are home run guys who are going to break it out on their own and do their own thing with the puck. And I think, Boston getting someone like that is really a good addition and a good injection of kind of that creativity and youth into this lineup, which is at times very just kind of rigid and possession-y, where they don't have a guy, that's going to just take the puck up the ice and be like, you know what, I'm just going to go for it, and I'm going to try something here and try and get around this guy. And I think that's going to be a welcomed addition to the Bruins lineup. And I love what the potential that Lysell brings to the Bruins, and the fact that they were able to get him way down in the 20s when where he was a guy that I thought for sure was going to go in the top 15 if not the top 10. I was really really excited for that pick. And the other pick I really liked was Brett Harrison. because when you get down to the third round, you're not getting a guy who's going to play right away. Obviously, you're going to get a guy who needs development and whatnot. But talk about somebody who just fits what the Boston Bruins are. I mean, this is a big center, and I'm glad that he's a center because that's a position that they definitely need to continue to add more to the pipeline in. Um, but for Harrison, I mean, this is a big go to the net, grind along the wall, physical center who really just fits what the Boston Bruins need. And I don't think he's obviously ever going to be a top 6 guy, but if
Hmm.
this guy long term ends up your third line center, or even your fourth line center in the third round, that's a solid pick. And I think he has a lot of potential to become a guy that is really beloved by Bruins fans and just plays that Boston Bruins style of hockey. So I was a big fan of both of those picks, and obviously as you get later in the draft, you kind of just trying to bring guys in that you see potential in. But overall, I thought they had a really solid draft, and I think because they weren't really reaching for guys and they were taking the best players available, and they were picking guys that were expected to go where they were picked,
Hmm.
I think that makes this one of the stronger Bruins drafts that we've seen in recent history.
Yeah, and when you talk about a guy like Brett Harrison, you said third line center, and some people may be like, "Oh, that must mean he's not good." But like we talked about on the show before, the New York Islanders in the playoffs we saw had a ton of depth on
Yep.
all lines. It wasn't
Yep.
just top line flashy players. It was the grinders on the third line who set the tone, got the pucks to the net, got into the dirty areas.
Mm-hmm.
So, it really kind of um, speaks to how the Bruins are trying to add a ton of depth to their team, and not only just bodies in terms of depth, but depth with roles that they
Mm-hmm.
can at least envision seeing them try to take over in the future.
Yeah, I mean, if Brett Harrison turns into a Casey Cizikas type player,
Mm,
who's
yeah,
gonna complain about that? Like, how
not
could
me.
you possibly complain about that if he turns into Casey Cizikas?
Not me. I
Yeah.
mean, you saw what Zizekas did in the playoffs and the impact that he had, and how the whole third line, not even the top line of the Islanders, for example, changed the momentum of games, and they kind of set the tone. And that's what the Bruins were missing in the playoffs. You had the flashy, David Pastrnak and stuff like that, but once the first line got off the ice,
There was
there
no
wasn't a ton
offense.
to be had. Yeah,
Yeah.
there wasn't a ton to be had, and there wasn't a ton of players that could really change the outcome of the game. And that's what you need. And I think by adding depth in this draft, the Bruins are on their way to doing that. Now the question is, can they develop these guys? Because drafting these guys is great.
Mm-hmm.
Development is often where teams kind of fall short. So I'll be interested to see how that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. The development side of things is massive. It's it, I like all these picks. I think they were good picks. But you've got to then get that player to the next step, to the AHL, then to the NHL. And you've got to develop all of these guys. And honestly, Boston's development hasn't exactly been spectacular. When you go and look at, some of their drafts, if you go back, obviously everyone talks about the 2015 draft. Jake DeBrusk has played 244 games. Brandon Carlo has turned out to be the best player to come out of that draft, but Senyshyn hasn't turned into anything. Zaboral hasn't turned into anything. Lausanne actually has been one of the better guys as well, but they had 6 picks in the first 2 rounds, 3 first-round picks and 3 second-round picks, and out of all of them, DeBrusk and Carlo are the only ones who have played more than 100 NHL games to this point. And that draft, that was 6 years ago now. And Zaboral has only played 44. Senyshyn's only played 14. Jacob Forsbacka Karlsson only played 29. And Lausanne's played 76. So out of 6 picks in the first 2 rounds, only 2 guys so far have played more than 100 games. That's not a great hit ratio right there. 2016, obviously, Charlie McAvoy's become a Norris-level defenseman. Trent Frederick is just kind of finding his way in the NHL. And then Ryan Lindgren He's played 116 games, but you traded him to the New York Rangers. And, he's become a solid player for the Rangers, but you sent him there in the Rick Nash deal. Other than that, nobody else has really played. Well, Steen's played 3 games, but no one else has really played much at the NHL. 2017, nobody's played more than 22 NHL games out of their entire 2017 draft. Jack Studnicka's played 22 games, and Urho Vakanainen's played 16, and Jeremy Swayman's played 10. Obviously, the Bruins still have a lot of high hopes for, all 3 of those guys, but nobody's really made it yet. 2018, nobody drafted in 2018 by the Bruins has played an NHL game yet, and same thing with 2019 and 2020. So while other teams are getting guys into the lineup much, much quicker than Boston, other teams are getting draft picks developed a lot quicker than Boston and turning into much higher level players than what we've seen from the Bruins so far. Boston's development, I think it leaves quite a bit to be desired, and I don't know if they're just drafting the wrong guys or if they're just not developing guys properly, but look at other teams around the league who have draft picks from 2017, 18, 19, 20, playing significant roles in their lineup. And it's not like it's just top 10 picks either. It's guys drafted late in the first round, guys drafted in the second round, playing significant roles in lineups already, and Boston doesn't really have that.
I like to call it the Bill Belichick approach, trying to find the sneaky diamond in the rough. And I feel like that's what the Bruins have been doing for the longest time now, and it's just not working out. I don't know why they've, up until, this year was a good draft, but even still we don't know. But I don't know why they elected to kind of take this approach, but we'll see about this year. I feel good about this year, honestly. I was very happy with their draft class because, I think there is a lot of potential there, and I didn't scratch my head with any of these picks. They all made sense. Now, unfortunately, I'm sorry it had to come to the fact that the Bruins' backs are against the wall with the core getting older, and they kind of had to nail this draft or else. Like you just said, it's been 5 years of missteps and undeveloped players, and it never should have gotten to this point. However, maybe this will be the draft that they can really start to develop, the draft picks that they have. I like the talent that they brought in, but we'll see.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I like what they've done. I like what they brought in, and this is a draft that I think you 5 years down the line from now, if these guys don't work out, I don't think you can blame Don Sweeney. And I don't think you can look back on this and say, it's easy to look back on some of the past drafts and blame Sweeney and say, that wasn't, some of these picks were not good picks. This one, I think you've got to look at it like, look at what we're saying now, how much we liked this. They picked the right guys. They picked the best players on the board. They took who they should have taken. If it doesn't work out in the long run, that's just the way it goes sometime. But I think that, this is a draft that you can't look back on and say, oh, Sweeney did a terrible job. It doesn't. If they don't work out, they don't work out. But at the time, these were the right picks. And I think hindsight's always 20/20. You got to look at it at the time. And at the time, I think they had a good draft this year, and hopefully it works out that way long term. And these guys, at least a few of them turn into solid NHLers. But overall, I think that they picked the guys that they should have picked.
Yeah, this is the first draft in probably quite a while that I'll probably say, well, these guys, if they don't pan out, well, these guys just didn't pan out versus, what the heck, Don Sweeney, you're reaching.
Yeah.
There's another good player on the board. Why did you take that?
Yep, exactly.
This is a draft where I'd feel comfortable if these guys didn't pan out versus seeing guys like Matt Barzal absolutely destroy the Bruins when I believe he was on the board when they picked.
He was on the board for 3 of their picks. Their three first round picks in 2015. He was on the board for all of them, and they didn't take them.
Yikes.
So was Kyle Connor. So was Thomas Chabot. So was a lot of other players who were significantly better than anyone that the Bruins took in that draft.
Yikes. Yeah, and like I hate to use another Patriots analogy, but it's like the Patriots when they drafted N'Keal Harry. You had, Justin Jefferson on the board and, things like that. It's like, come on,
Yeah.
there's people right there for you to take. And you always have to try to be the smart guy, try to pick
Yeah.
undervalued players, and they're literally right there in front of you. But, I guess, they're in the higher up positions and we're not. So,
Well, at least they drafted Lysell this time
yeah.
because he was
Yep.
clearly the best player still available on the board. Um, again, I was so surprised that he dropped all the way to 21. I had him ranked 11, like I said, so that's a big drop for
That is.
somebody in the first round, and I think Boston has a chance to get an absolute steal with that pick.
I agree. I totally agree.
All right, so that was our thoughts on the Bruins 2021 draft. Now we're going to move on and talk about some of their re-signings, guys who are coming back from the team last year, and then after we'll get into the new additions via free agency. We're also going to talk about the guys who maybe aren't coming back, particularly one big one, and a big question mark in goal as well. With we don't know what's going to happen with Tuukka Rask long term. Again, I don't think there's a real rush on that because he's not going to play until February anyway, so that's not something they have to deal with right now. Which I think is why nothing's really happened with that regard yet. But losing David Krejci is definitely a bit of a hit. That's a loss to this lineup without a doubt. So re-signings, it started with Brandon Carlo, 6-year deal, $4.1 million per season. Now, for a guy who's as good of a shutdown defenseman as Brandon Carlo is, I think this contract's an absolute steal, and it's even more of a steal because of what the defensive market turned into in free agency and just before, which I think is just out of control right now. I cannot believe some of the contracts that teams are giving defensemen who are good D-men, but not worth the money that they're getting. So overall, I love the Carlo deal. Obviously, 6 years is a long time, but he's 24. So, I have no problem giving a 6-year deal to a player that young. And 4.1 million per season, I think, is an absolute steal of a cap hit for Brandon Carlo. He is one of the best young shutdown guys in the league. Doesn't add a ton offensively, but you can play him against the other team's best player, and he's going to lock them down defensively. He's one of the best defensive defensemen, younger defensive defensemen in the league. So, your thoughts on the Carlo deal? I know I absolutely love it, and I just hope he stays healthy. That's my one real question mark.
I love the Carlo deal for a couple reasons. For one, we saw when he went down in the New York Islanders series how much the Bruins sorely missed him.
Oh, yeah.
And he is 24 coming into this year, and the contract will be up. He'll be an unrestricted free agent when he turns 30 in the 2027-28 season. That, I think, is a perfect window for a couple reasons. For one, he's young right now. You're going to get his prime and his best years. Once his contract runs out at 30, that in kind of hockey age, so to speak, is a tricky age because they're not old necessarily, but they're not too young either. So it was smart to give him this big deal while he's still in his prime. And you look at some of the other contracts, like I believe we talked about last time, the Charlie Coyle deal, the Bruins kind of gave him a long contract on the back end. He's on the other side of his 20s, I believe. And it kind of was a question mark in regards to what are we going to get out of him, especially since Coyle kind of had a down year last year. Brandon Carlo, we know what we're going to get. We're going to get a very good defenseman in his prime, and that will give the Bruins a chance to renegotiate when he's 30. And by that point, they'll have a even better idea of his trajectory and maybe sign him to a shorter deal down the road.
Yeah, Coyle's 29 now, in his late 20s, and he was in his late 20s when he signed that big deal. So that you're sticking with a player into his mid 30s, where with Carlo, I mean, like you said, this contract's up, and he's still just 30 years old, which again is not, you can still have 4 or 5 really good years after 30. before you start getting into the 36, 37 years where, things start to really decline and slow down. So I think the Carlo deal is an absolute home run. Again, I just hope that he can stay healthy, because that's kind of been the one thing with him early in his career. He's dealt with a lot of injuries. He's got a concussion history already. That's, that Bruins need him on the ice. We saw that in the Islanders series. That whole series changed when Brandon Carlo went down. And I think the Bruins would have won that series had Carlo not gotten injured.
I
But
agree.
once he went down, Boston's defense just fell apart. So this is a guy who is vitally important to the Bruins. And again, to get him at just over $4 million per season, I think is absolutely fantastic, especially given what we've seen the defensemen getting around the league in this offseason with some of the ridiculous contracts that have been handed out to D-men. I think this is a home run contract for the Bruins, and one of their biggest wins of this offseason.
And when you look at his previous contracts, in 2019 and 2020, 2019 and 2020, he was playing on a 2-year deal worth just over $5 million. So he's always been a player that is a value player, and he's a value player who can produce. And $4 million for this current contract this year, that's a good chunk of change, but it's also not breaking the bank. It's enough of an increase for Carlo to kind of notice, I guess you can say, while not breaking the bank. And the Bruins have kind of, I don't want to say broke the bank, but given some questionable amounts of money to aging veterans. This time around, they played it smart, and I think they got even better value this year with Carlo's newest contract. Now we'll see when he turns 30 down the road if his market increases and the Bruins can keep him. But for now, I'm very happy with this deal.
Yeah, absolutely. Another deal that I was stoked about was bring back Taylor Hall, who played phenomenal for the Bruins after the trade last year. Coming in from Buffalo, was having an abysmal season in Buffalo. I had a lot of questions about Hall, and I wasn't high before that trade happened. I was not high on the Bruins bringing him in. I didn't want them to go after Hall. I wasn't excited about it, but after watching him play, he proved me wrong. He answered every question I had, and he was absolutely incredible for Boston to end the regular season and into the playoffs. And obviously, he slowed down a little bit in the Islanders series, but all of the Bruins slowed down. That wasn't a Taylor Hall problem. That was an everybody thing where everybody kind of slowed down in the Islanders series. But to have him back now on a 4-year deal at $6 million per, this was literally exactly the contract I was hoping for. And I don't remember if I ever said it on this show or if I said it during streams or whatever, but people were asking, if Boston brings back Hall, what do you want? And I said 3 or 4-year deal, nothing longer than that, and somewhere between 5.5 and 6.5 million per year. I did not want to go more than 6.5 million per season, and they just absolutely nailed what I wanted for a contract. 4 years, 6 million. I think that is right on the dot for what Taylor Hall should be getting, and this is huge for the Bruins to get him back, because secondary scoring was such a problem for Boston last year. You had the top line, obviously, they're incredible. They're the best line in the league. But then after that, there was a lot of issues finding offense from other places for the Bruins last year until Hall came in. And then the second line got going when Hall came in after the trade deadline. But third and fourth lines brought you pretty much nothing offensively last season. Now, I think that's going to change this coming year, and we'll talk about that when we get to the new additions via free agency. But to bring Hall back and keep that second line going, that's absolutely massive, I think, for the Bruins. And I love this deal, and one that I think needed to be done.
For all the crap that I've talked about when it comes to Don Sweeney, he's had a great 3 or 4 months between acquiring Taylor Hall, getting done what he did in the draft
Yep.
and getting, what he did in free agency, which we'll talk about in a little bit. He's had a fun time. He's had a good time trying to keep key parts for the Bruins, and Taylor Hall was undoubtedly a key part last year. You saw kind of the speed element he brought to
Yeah.
the second line. You saw the playmaking ability. You saw the goal scoring, and that was in half a year. I'm excited to see what he's going to be able to do in his first full year in Boston. And for a guy that was kind of thrown in via trade in April, I thought he did very well last year. Now, I've heard, some people talk about, oh, well, he didn't do much in the Islanders series. He disappeared. Like you said, the whole team did. So I'm really not going to hold that against him. And I'm excited to have him back. Like he said originally that he wanted to be in Boston. He wanted to sign that
Hmm.
contract, and he got it done. And I'm really excited that this just adds more depth to the team, which they need. And I wonder what types of numbers he is going to be able to put up with a full year. I'm very excited.
Yeah, I am too. I'm looking for 60 plus points, 25 to 30 goals.
That would be awesome.
I'm expecting a big year from Hall. If he's going to live up to this contract now, he's got to keep playing the way that he did at the end of last season. He's got to bring it for a full year now at that
Hmm.
level, because
Hmm.
that's what we're paying him for. Now, unfortunately, the Bruins did lose a significant player, and that is, well, last season it was Taylor Hall's center, and that is second line center David Krejci, who has gone back to the Czech Republic. Says that he wants to play at home, wants to play in front of his family back home, and I 100% support him and wish him the best. And I completely understand why Krejci wants to do this, because he's 35 years old. He's not going to be playing professional hockey forever. He, I mean, came over and played in Providence when he was, just barely like 20 years old. Obviously had a lot of great years with the Bruins, but for a guy like that who came over so young, actually he might have
Hmm.
been 19 when he first came over. So, he hasn't played back. He's been playing in North America for forever, and
Hmm.
he hasn't really had that chance to play back home in front of. It's not like the guys that play in the KHL for 3 years and then come to the NHL as a 23 or 24-year-old. Like he came over and played in the AHL. I think he was 19 when he came over, and he made it up to Boston rather quickly, and then just played with the Bruins for the rest, up until this point. So I completely understand why he would want to go home and play in front of his family back in the Czech Republic and all of that. But there's no doubt this is a loss out of the Bruins lineup, though. This is a big hit, losing your second line center and not really having a direct replacement for him.
Yeah, they're going to need to have somebody step up in order to replace Krejci. And, when you look at his career, you talk about a value pick. He was drafted in the second round in 2004. Like that, just like what he brought to the table, the stability that he brought, the consistency that he brought was incredible for Boston. 730 points overall in his NHL career, and I totally get him wanting to go back home. He certainly earned that right, so to speak. I don't want to
Hmm.
say, that he didn't earn that right because everybody deserves to go home to their families, but he's put in his time in the NHL, and I
Hmm.
completely understand his decision. He was kind of, rock solid for the Bruins for many years, and although some people got upset, by his inconsistencies at times, he was always on the ice. He always gave it his all, and that's all you can really ask for out of an NHL player. And I'm just happy that he feels comfortable with his decision and that he can go home and play in front of his family because that must be such a special feeling. And I'll be following his progress closely.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like that's something that we who are from North America, like, we don't really understand what it's like for these European guys who leave home as either teenagers or in their early 20s and come to halfway across the world to play hockey. For us, if we make the NHL, we're playing at home. We're playing in our own backyard. It's like it's not a big move for people from North America, but for the European players, I mean, a lot of them never get a chance to play in front of their parents, their grandparents, or their siblings, their brothers and sisters. Like, because they're halfway across the world, and most of the time they're not taking their entire families with them. They're moving, and their families are staying back in Russia or Sweden or Slovakia or Finland or the Czech Republic, wherever they're coming from. So we don't really have that perspective of going home to play for the first time, because we'd be playing at home all the time. But for these guys,
Right.
they're not. So I completely understand his decision and his reasoning and his wanting to go back and play in front of people that he's probably hasn't gotten a chance to play in front of in 16 plus years
Yeah.
since he was playing junior hockey or whatever in the Czech Republic. So it's definitely a decision that I fully respect and wish him all the best with going forward, and hope that he has a great season playing over in the Czech Republic.
Yeah, and there is the door is open for a return. I've read Bruce Cassidy said
Mm-hmm.
that.
Yep.
I mean, he is on the older side, so I could see him maybe coming back, honestly, in an administrative role instead of like a hockey role per se. I could
Mm-hmm.
see him finishing out his career back at home and maybe coming back and helping out the Bruins as a scout or something. But I'm very happy for him. He's lived every kid's dream of playing
Yep.
professional hockey in the NHL, and now he gets to play a couple more good years in front of his family, and it's the perfect situation for him, and I certainly wish him all the best.
Yeah, 100%. So Krejci obviously leaves a hole in that second line center spot to play with Taylor Hall, who we were just talking about. I think Coyle is going to get first crack at that second line center spot. Coyle had obviously a terrible year last year, but we found out after the season that he basically played the entire year with a bad knee. So I think Coyle deserves a healthy Coyle deserves a chance to get back to being the 50-plus point guy that we know that he can be. And obviously, if he has another bad year, now we've got a serious problem. But if he's able to bounce back this coming season, I think last year can be forgiven because he was playing injured. And, if he gets back to being a 50-plus point guy, then that's easily your second line center right there. That's fine production for a second line guy. And Taylor Hall will probably be the biggest point producer on that second line. You're looking for him to, have 60 plus points. So I think the second line can be fine if Coyle is healthy and gets back to being a 50 plus point player. If he can't do that, then I think the Bruins have bigger problems and you're going to have to go out and make some sort of trade.
As somebody with bad knees, I definitely empathize with Charlie Coyle, but when you look at Coyle's game, he can handle the puck very well.
Mm-hmm.
He can take it to the top of the blue line, and he is very good with the puck. Taylor Hall has speed, so I would be excited to see how that combination, works, because Taylor
Mm-hmm.
Hall is also very good with the puck, and we've talked, we kind of been down on Charlie Coyle on the show, and for good reason. He has a huge contract, and he did not perform
Yeah.
last year. Now is his chance to show up and show that he can rebound. Hopefully his knee is better, and he has a big year, because if he can have, like you said, a 50, 60-point year on that second line, that, takes care of the depth scoring right there and takes the pressure off of the big three in the top line.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that the Bruins need, especially as far as their offense goes. They need to take some of that pressure off of the top line. Marchand, Bergeron, Pastrnak cannot do it all, and way too much over the last number of seasons. That's ended up being the downfall of the Bruins, is that they're completely reliant on that top line. And as we know, one-line teams do not usually make it very far in the playoffs. They can get to the playoffs fine. They can be a very good team in the regular season, relying heavily on one line. But once you get to the playoffs and you're playing the best of the best, you don't usually win very much with only one line. And we saw that last year where all the one-line teams were out by the end of the second round. So if Boston's going to really make that cup push and be a full-on contender for the Stanley Cup, they've got to get more offense from lines 2 through 4. And, that remains to be seen if that's going to happen this year. But they've certainly made some significant moves this offseason to try and help lines 2 through 4, particularly lines 3 and 4. And I do like that the moves where I think that you're going to see better secondary scoring from the Bruins this coming season.
You're going to see a lot of grit on the bottom lines too, and that's something that I thought they were missing at times last year when the Islanders' third line was absolutely beating the bag out of the Bruins, and the Bruins did nothing.
Yeah.
I think they did add some grit this offseason, and I'm excited to see how this all shapes out. I'm excited to see where each player goes and how they fit into this team. I'm just pulling up some of the names right now. Nick Foligno, I think he's good. He had 13 assists for 20 points in 2020, 2021. He's 33, but I'm not complaining about that just because you need veteran presence on the third line and the bottom lines, because I truly believe that's what makes them effective. Because the third line guys, not to sound, crass or whatever, but they can't score, so they know how to get the job done in other ways. And I think that's important. And then you talk about a guy like Eric Holla. He recorded, 9 goals and 12 assists for 21 points. He's not going to be, a big-time scorer, but he could provide some secondary scoring. And, it's interesting the combination of people that they brought back. You had a guy like Mike Riley, who was acquired in the Taylor Hall trade, and they brought him back, which I think was a very smart move. I don't know about you, but and then they brought Foligno in, Holla in, Thomas Nosek, and Derek Forbort, who is interesting to me because I think that he brings that type of grit that we're looking for. He's 6'4" and 219 pounds.
Yeah.
So he also brings size defensively, which is something I thought we were lacking at times last year. And I'm really happy with the additions that they made. I will say that the casual fan probably won't like these additions because they're not big names, but the people who like hockey and the people listening, who follow the Bruins, you guys should be very happy. We should be very happy because they brought in veteran players who know their roles, and they added size to the defense, and it's going to be interesting to see what they do, because last year there was a lot of youth. This year there's a good mixture of both.
Yeah, Mike Riley was the last re-signing before actual free agency opened, and I love the Riley deal. I wanted him back. I think he brings some much-needed offense from the back end, which is something that Boston doesn't have a lot of. Obviously, Charlie McAvoy is a great all-around defenseman, but, Matt Grzelcyk, I guess, was more of the offensive guy, but he was injured a lot last year, and he missed a lot of time and wasn't healthy for much of the season, so they needed someone else that could really kind of carry things offensively from the defense, and Mike Riley is a tremendous puck mover, very good skater, and will add that offense. So I think that they needed someone like him. There wasn't a lot on the market that was fit that role well. So I think them bringing Riley back was definitely the right move. And I was a big fan of that. And then we got into the new additions, the free agent signings, the guys coming into the team. And I think Boston absolutely nailed free agency.
Mhm.
with what they did this offseason. I love the moves. I think that their bottom six is significantly improved from what it was last season. Obviously, they brought in a goaltender that I am very, very high on in Linus Ullmark. And Forbert, I love the Forbert edition because when you brought Riley back, you were assuming that Riley is going to play with Carlo. You didn't really need a top four guy then. You know, you have McAvoy, Grzelcyk, Riley, Carlo. There's your top four. You needed a bottom pair guy, though. You needed a defensive guy. And like you said, I think size was absolutely something that they were lacking on the back end last year and that they needed more of, especially when Kevin Miller was out injured. And they bring in Derek Forbert, and I have been a big fan of Forbert his entire career, going all the way back to when he came up with LA and obviously played in Winnipeg last year. And I am a huge fan of Derek Forbert. And this guy, 6'4", 220, big body, and he uses it. And he blocks a ton of shots. He clears out the front of the net. He's not afraid to hit. He plays tough along the boards. I think that is exactly the kind of defenseman that Boston needed on their third pair. Now, the worst thing you can do is bring in a guy like Derek Forbert and try and make him a top four guy, because he's not. He's not a top four guy. But if you play him in the proper role, penalty kill, third pair D, physical guy in the defensive zone, if you play him in the proper role, I think he's going to be a really effective player and somebody that Bruins fans are going to like a lot because of his style of play. So I'm a big fan of that one.
Yeah, and I think Bruce Cassidy has done a nice job of letting players know their roles and fitting players so that they can play at their highest level. I have confidence that he'll be able to do that with Forbert, and I think Forbert being a veteran versus a younger player, he knows his role too. So I have confidence that he'll be able to get the job done.
Yeah, and Linus Ullmark, I want to talk about him because I was super high on him being a guy that Boston could potentially bring in. I actually thought that he was going to be too big of a fish for Boston to get as far as goaltending goes. We knew the Bruins were needed something in goal because Rask was an unrestricted free agent and obviously with the injury out until February anyway. Halak was a UFA, and we knew probably wasn't coming back. Obviously, didn't end up coming back. Then you had Swayman and Vladar, who are two kids. I mean, as well as Jeremy Swayman played last year, he played 10 games. It's a very, very small sample size there. You obviously weren't going to be relying on him to be your starting goaltender. He's only played 10 games. So they needed to do something as far as goaltending was concerned. And I think Ullmark is an absolute home run. This guy put up tremendous numbers with the worst team in the league in front of him
Yep.
in Buffalo.
Yep.
He stops a huge percentage of his shots against. He had a 914 save percentage last year, I think, with the Buffalo Sabres in front of him. I mean, that should easily be a 920, if not a 925, with the Bruins in front of him. His goals against, he was able to keep under 3 despite playing in Buffalo. I think people are gonna be surprised with how good he is now that he has a good team in front of him. Because he was a good goalie with a terrible team in front of him. Now that he has a good team in front of him, I think he's really going to take some people by surprise with how good of a goaltender he is. And I have really, really high hopes for Ullmark in Boston. I also have high expectations because I'm expecting him to play at a very, very high level. But I was super excited for the Bruins to bring him in. I think he's going to be a great kind of bridge goaltender going from Rask to Swayman eventually. But for right now, Ullmark is the guy. And I cannot wait to see him in a Bruins uniform. I think he's going to be really, really good.
You took the words right out of my mouth. He performed well for a terrible Buffalo team last
Yeah.
year. He posted a 9-6-3 record, 917 save percentage, 2.63 goals against average. That's very good. I mean, he was a bright spot for the Sabres last season, and like you mentioned, this Bruins team is much better than Buffalo, and I truly think he'll be able to thrive. He signed a 4-year deal, and that will give him a chance to really make his mark in Boston while also giving time for Swayman to develop a little bit more and not having to rush Swayman into being the starting goaltender right away if things hit a bump in the road.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's huge too. I've been saying this all off season because so many Bruins fans have been, Swayman, Swayman, Swayman. He's just a kid, and he only has played 10 games. Yes, he played extremely well in those 10 games, but the sample size is very, very small. And the absolute last thing you want to do is Carter Hart, Jeremy Swayman,
Yeah.
and force him into playing too big of a role too soon, and then he ends up having an awful season. His confidence gets completely destroyed, and basically everything that happened last year with Carter Hart in Philadelphia would then happen to Jeremy Swayman, and that is the worst thing you can do for a goaltender who is still young and developing. So I think it's really important that the Bruins let Swayman develop, not rush him, not push him into too big of a role too early, and let him come along at the proper pace. And the signing of Ullmark allows them to do that, because now you have a starting goaltender for the next 3 to 4 years who then can kind of gradually turn things over to Swayman. And Ullmark is still young enough where when you get down to the final year of his contract, he could be a massive trade chip. He could
Yeah.
he would have a ton of value on the trade market still, 3 years from now. So if Swayman is ready to fully take over, then, you trade Ullmark and you get a decent return for him down the line. So I think that signing is an absolute home run, and I'm really excited to see him in a Bruins uniform.
With a lot of the contracts this year in the offseason, the Bruins did a good job of preparing for the future. We talked about the Carlo deal. That ends when he's 30. You talked about the Allmark deal. That ends, he's 27 right now. He'll be 32.
Yep.
Or, yeah,
31,
32. Or, yeah.
31, 32, yep.
So they did a nice job of kind of mapping out the future and giving themselves time to prepare. They gave themselves long enough deals to where they could get, ideal production while also not kind of putting all their eggs in one basket and signing these players to longer deals and potentially making them A, either lose their trade value, or B, making the contract in albatross down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you 100%. I think that the deals that they've signed have been very, very smart deals this offseason, and that is great to see. Moving on now to the forwards that they added in free agency. Obviously, Nick Foligno, one of the biggest names. Came in, longtime captain of the Columbus Blue Jackets, finished last year with Toronto. Definitely doesn't have the offense that he once did at 33 years old. However, he brings every intangible in the book to this Bruins team. Toughness, grit, stands up for his teammates, incredible in the locker room, obviously was a former captain, great leader. A huge addition, I think, to the bottom six. Eric Howla, I think he's going to be your offensive guy. He had 21 points in a shortened season last year with Nashville. He's kind of bounced around, played for a lot of different teams, but with him, assuming that he's going to be your third-line center, that's Eric Howell is the guy that I look for, 35-ish points next season, and to really help improve the bottom six scoring for the Bruins. And then Tomas Nosek, this guy is a fourth liner who can actually bring some offense, and that is something that Boston desperately needs.
All right.
Their fourth line did absolutely nothing offensively last season. Nosek played on the fourth line with Vegas and had 18 points as a fourth liner. So, that's better than Sean Corrali, who had 9 points last season. So, Nosek is going to add to this team's secondary scoring as well in a fourth line role, which I am super happy about. I mean, every move that they made as far as forwards go was just to improve bottom six scoring, which I think is one of the biggest issues with the Bruins and one of the biggest areas that they needed to improve, and they went out and did it with Nosek, Howla, and Foligno coming into the lineup. I love these contracts.
Yeah, and when you look at the statistics now, me personally, I don't put a ton of stock into the plus minus rating. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, but when you look at, Nosek, he had a +7 rating and Hala had a +21 rating last year. And for, bottom line guys, that's crucial to me because that just allows for stability while the top guys are not on the ice. And that also shows that, you know, they can produce and be impactful. They're not just going to stand there like traffic cones.
Mm-hmm.
They want to contribute and they want to compete. And so I really love these two additions, and I'll be interested to see, what Nosek does because, like you said, the production for a fourth liner, 18 points. The Bruins could have desperately used that last year. So let's hope he can. Let's hope Nosek can rebound or continue to play well and help out the Bruins with that fourth line.
Yeah, 100%. I think these additions are going to definitely improve the bottom six scoring. I think Nosek's a huge upgrade over Corrali, and
Yep.
they got him on a cheaper contract. Corrali got $2.5 million per season
Wow.
from Columbus, which
Man.
that absolutely blows my mind. I think that's a
Yeah.
terrible contract, but um, Nosek's an upgrade there. I think Foligno and Howla absolutely make the third line better. Um, and I think we're going to see much more balance and depth from the Bruins offensively this coming season compared to what we saw last year. And that's one of the biggest things that they needed to fix, and they went out and fixed it. So that's why I'm such a big fan of these moves.
You're going to see a more complete team, I think.
Yeah.
And, you're going to see a mix of veterans and younger players. Last year, I thought, the Bruins had a lot of youngsters on the ice, and they still perform well. So with these veteran additions, I would expect them to perform even better come the fall and the winter.
Yeah, definitely agree. So, Um, that's been Boston's offseason so far, and there's been our takes on it. We talked about the draft, we talked about the re-signings, the new guys coming into the lineup, and overall, I think Boston's had a very, very good offseason. They've done about as well as you could have expected them to. Um, and they're a team that's going to be looking to compete for the Stanley Cup next year, and I am really excited to see what this team looks like come October, get this team back on the ice and see how well they play and whatnot. But overall, I think Boston has done well this offseason. Kudos to Don Sweeney and the job he's done over the last few
Yep.
months. And I think they're setting up to be a team that is going to go for it next season and try and bring home a Stanley Cup.
I certainly hope so because I need another parade in Boston, even if
Yeah,
it's too long. But
definitely.
no, I totally agree. We said that this offseason could, this offseason and next offseason could, define the tenure of Don Sweeney and Cam Neely. And for all the criticism that I usually give Don Sweeney, I have to give them a hand because they did a really good job in trying to make this team more balanced. And I think they learned something from the playoffs with the additional depth on the lines. So I can't fault them for at least not trying this offseason.
Hmm.
I think they're at least trying to do well in the draft and in with these free agent signings, and they definitely deserve a pat on the back. And I can't say that they didn't try this year. All I want to see is effort, Don Sweeney, and you showed it to me this summer.
Definitely. So that is going to bring us now to the end of episode 32 of Black and Gold Weekly. Danny, thank you so much for coming back on again, and great chatting with you about the Bruins offseason. We'll definitely have you on again soon as we get closer to the start of next year.
Oh man, I can't wait. I love being on here, and it's always great talking with you. Always great.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much again. Big thank you to Mark Allred and the entire team at Black and Gold Productions. This show is in partnership with them. It would not be happening without them. So thank you so much for the support. Thank you for making this happen. And be sure to check out all the great writers part of Black and Gold Productions at blackandgoldhockey.com. And you can also check out the podcast network as well. A bunch of great podcasts, weekly shows that you can check out on your favorite podcast platform. This is episode 32 of Black and Gold Weekly, a weekly YouTube show about the Boston Bruins. And we'll be back next week with episode 33. More to talk about as the offseason rolls on. But that's going to bring us to the end of this one. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll be talking to you soon.